everyone, thank you so much for joining us, whether you are joining physically or online. I'm Lucy Wark, this is Georgia Grace, our pronouns are both she, her. And we're here to collaborate with TEDx and We're From Normal to bring you a workshop on everything that we've seen connected to sexuality in lockdown and the pandemic, and a few awesome and practical strategies that you can use as you're coming out of lockdown to enjoy your best sex life.
Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge it always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
So, Georgia, who are you?
This is a question I'm constantly asking myself, particularly after being in a lockdown. So, I am a certified Australian sex coach, and basically what that means is I work with individuals, couples and groups supporting people to have a more fulfilling relationship with sex. I love working in group contexts because, yes, it's wonderful that you're here and we're here to, give you our expert ideas from really being in the thick of it in lockdown. But we can also learn so much from being in a group. And I think when it comes to sex, sexuality, pleasure and relationships, when we can speak openly about sex and pleasure with people and learn from one another, I think that's where the true growth and the true information comes from. So as you can see in this kind of manic presentation, I work in a few ways. I love working with the media to make this information accessible. I also work in sex tech, obviously with Normal, and that, expands to working with developing toys and products as well as content products. So we created an online sex education course to make sure that everyone could get the information that they wanted and needed. So I guess that's who I am today. Who are you?
So I'm Lucy. I run Normal. We're an Australian sexual wellness brand, and our mission is to normalise healthy conversations about sex and sexuality. And what we sort of talk about internally as our goal is to give everyone the information, confidence and tools to explore sexuality, whatever that means for you. And we know sexuality is diverse. We're not all attracted to the same type of person. We're not all the same sexuality. We're not all the same gender identity. But whatever that journey is, we're here to be that trusted guide for you. And working with Georgia as our in-house sex coach has been one of the best parts of working on Normal, and also hosting workshops like this where we really get to bring people together and connect over learning about sex and exploring all the things that are on our minds about that as well.
Perhaps there may be some conversations that feel slightly awkward or clunky or uncomfortable, and actually that's not such a bad space to be. I like to call that your learning edge. That's the place where you're doing something differently, and I guess when you're learning about sex, it's a really great thing to do things differently. So feel into that learning edge where it's maybe a bit clunky, but don't push yourself too far, and maybe don't stay too much in the known. So feel into what that means for you today, and know that after we will be sort of pointing you in the direction if you need further support, whether that is you have a curiosity and you want more information, or perhaps you need some support to work through something.
Amazing. And as with all things sex, we all come to it with our own experiences. And while today's workshop is intended to be pretty lighthearted and fun, if it does bring up anything difficult for you, that is completely okay. And feel free to take whatever steps, whether you're at home and you need to kind of switch off or pause, or whether you're here and you need to take a step away or do something to soothe yourself, whatever's necessary, just make sure that you're doing that as well. Because we always want to be having these conversations in a way that feels great for everyone. All right. Let's go. So we have a few questions for people at home to have a think about, and feel free to screenshot these and even pause it if you need to, so that you can kind of take the time to reflect as well. So Georgia, do you want to just run through a few of these reflections we'd love people to bring to the workshop?
So the first question is, how has the pandemic affected desire and libido for you? How has the pandemic affected dating and/or relationships? How has lockdown or the pandemic affected self-pleasure and masturbation for you? How has the pandemic affected sexual confidence? How has the pandemic affected sexual exploration for you?
While everyone has a chance to think about those, we wanted to share back some of the things that we've been hearing in our capacities. And for Georgia, that's a sex coach, sort of helping people one-on-one through to millions at a time with her TikToks.
Millions.
We've got some fun stories about that. Through to the type of formal research that we do at Normal, speaking to our users and also speaking to sort of demographically representative groups of people to get a finger on the pulse of sexuality in lockdown and coming out of it. So first, I think, Georgia, what are the themes that you've been seeing in the pandemic and in lockdown in terms of sex and sexuality?
So I've had this really lucky position to be able to work with people so closely and really get a sense of how this has shaped how they think or feel about sex, pleasure, their bodies, relationships. And that I did that in session, working with people one-on-one or couples, as well as doing lots of online workshops or gatherings. So it has allowed me to sort of see a few key themes that have emerged. The first being the stress-sex connection. We know how stress can have an impact on both sexual function, but also how willing you are to engage in sex with yourself or with others. And it possibly hasn't been a more stressful time than collectively or as a whole it has been, whether that is the financial, political, social, cultural stress, whether it's relational stress. There's many factors that have potentially had an impact on how people feel in their bodies. And we know that when you're stressed, your body produces the stress hormone cortisol, and as a result, that can affect your sexual function and how willing you are to engage with sex. Which also brings us to another theme whereby most people have noticed a change in their desire. I'm seeing in session, people come to me when they have an issue or a concern. So I typically see that people have had less desire for sex, and as a result, it's really concerning for them. Because I have noticed this, I want to take you through the basics of desire today so that you and others can really get a sense of maybe what you could do if you've also noticed these changes. The way we date has changed. To state the obvious, it's been absolutely impossible to date. So we've had to get creative, and I want to talk to, some insights that I've had from my creative clients, both the legal and the not legal, so that, we can really see how this has shaped how we, flirt and date with people. Boundaries are front of mind. I've done a lot of work to support people in moving out of lockdown and feeling safe to do so, and getting them to get a sense of what their boundaries are and what that could do to make sure that they're relating to others in a way that feels great for them. Sexual confidence has taken a huge hit, and maybe I invite you to feel into that, whether your sexual confidence has taken a hit. Maybe it hasn't. Maybe you're feeling the best you ever have in your body. But that is, certainly what I'm noticing in session. And it's a time of inquiry. People are curious. We're in a sexual revolution, so it's a very exciting time. And as a result, we're seeing that people are investing in their education, they're exploring, they're researching. They are, a few key themes that I'm noticing.
Yeah, amazing. And I think some of the macro research that we've done, so we spoke to about 1,000 Australians recently, all about their experiences of lockdown, dating, sex, relationships, and all of those topics. And I just want to share the top 10 findings with you. But I certainly think some of those observations are really being seen in the macro data as well. So one thing that we've really noticed is that lockdown has forced people to kind of clarify the status of relationships. And so actually about 25% of the people we spoke to had changed their relationship status, whether that was from single to in a relationship to it's complicated, whatever the third version of that triangle is. But we've certainly seen a lot of sort of change during this period of time. And also we've seen that a lot of that change was concentrated in people who started the sort of pandemic or lockdown with some sort of situation that sat between single and in a relationship. So while sort of 1 in 4 people were changing their relationship status overall, it's actually sort of a majority of people, so about 1 in 2, who are changing their status from it's complicated, either kind of moving to single or moving into a relationship. And the binary categories that we've had during the lockdown have actually sort of, I think in many ways, forced that kind of conversation in those directions as well. So we all know the intimate partner bubble, and we asked single people, what were you doing? And about 1 in 6 told us that they actually ended up in a short-term intimate partner relationship, which is actually a pretty interesting kind of trend in terms of casual sex or casual sex-based agreements, and that's probably an increase as well for our society. So it will be really interesting to see if that holds after the lockdown. So a lot of people found, I think this is hopefully not new, but a lot of people found dating in lockdown somewhat frustrating as well. So we certainly heard that a lot of single people didn't even want to date. They sort of thought, it's not that I'm not looking for someone, but I don't actually want to date because without being able to meet in person, it doesn't feel worth it. So for a lot of people, they sort of feel like their dating life has been on hold in this period. And for those who did date, it wasn't necessarily, obviously we don't, I think, want to presume that the purpose of dating is always to end up in a serious relationship. Doesn't have to be and doesn't ever have to be. But I think for those who wanted that, it was a pretty small proportion who found that dating actually led to a serious relationship. So about 1 in 100 in our research in this period. So there might be a lot of people who are sort of excited by the possibility of getting back out there. For people who started in relationships, actually I think there's a really interesting effect happening where we sort of see one group who are thriving, so couples who actually found that there were really positive impacts on their relationships from this period, whether that was getting to be more intimate with each other, getting to work on some issues, or even exploring new things together, actually being at home together allowed for that. But there was also a pretty significant group who were just surviving as well. So sort of 1 in 3 people in couples told us that they weren't feeling a lot of desire for sex with a partner while they were at home with them as well. So that's speaking to that desire point that I think George has seen in session. That certainly is a trend that's supported as well. So I think one of the interesting things about this post-lockdown period is we've heard a lot of media coverage that focuses on the notion of the hot vax summer, or the sort of, getting back out there, PDAs everywhere, everyone's like throwing themselves at the dating world. And yes, that is true for some people. So 1 in 5 singles identified with the statement that they are super keen to date post-lockdown. But actually, I think the underlying data is a little bit more mixed. So people are kind of coming to this with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. So a lot of singles would tell us, well, actually, I'm feeling less sexual confidence, or I've forgotten how to flirt or socialise because it's been so long. So I think there's actually a more interesting story underneath all of the kind of celebrations of the end of lockdown that we've been seeing as well. Of course, number 10, probably not a surprise, but a lot of the population spent more time masturbating and self-pleasuring during the lockdown, so 40% of us roughly. And this leads us to number 11, which is that nearly half of us incorporated new items into our self-pleasure routine. And this is certainly something that at Normal, because we sell sex toys, we have very much seen in the sales data as well. So it's been a really interesting period. We'll dive deeper into some of these findings as we go through the different sections of the workshop, but those are some of the big headline things that we've been seeing as well. And for Georgia and I, we found that some of these big themes that we were seeing in the data and in that direct experience were around dating, around desire, and around sexual exploration. And so that's what this workshop is going to speak to today. Both what we're seeing, what you're all experiencing, and then what you can do practically to sort of explore those things post-lockdown. So we asked a lot of people about their experiences of dating in COVID. 30% told us basically, I didn't even bother dating because I didn't think it was worth it trying to see anyone. So sort of connecting into that notion that where does it go if you can't meet up physically? A bunch of people actually, sort of 1 in 5 said to us, well, actually, I did date, but I didn't really meet anyone. And the sort of, that's maybe reflected in the kind of 1 in 100 who actually took dating into a serious relationship in COVID. And then, of course, we have the 1 in 6 who had their short-term intimate partners as well. Interestingly, we saw a lot of dating app fatigue in lockdown as well. 1% of people told us, I absolutely loved using dating apps in lockdown. Quite a large number of people sort of said, oh, I've stopped using them due to lockdown, or I felt a bit tired, but I'm still using them. So generally it was kind of a sense of, particularly in the later lockdowns, that people were getting more fatigued with the prospect of online only or largely online dating. Also, interestingly, we asked people about, well, what do you think about vaccination and all those types of issues, and how are they playing into the way that you're thinking about dating? And it appears that being vaccinated really does make you sexier. So a really strong majority of people told us, well, actually, if someone is vaccinated, that positively impacts my perception of them. And then a pretty strong majority also said, if you're not vaccinated for non-medical reasons, then that would negatively impact my perception of you. And we had heard similar things about other COVID-related behaviours, like following the COVID rules, or sort of believing in vaccination as well. And finally, when we come to feelings about sex and reopening, Interestingly, there is a portion of people who were saying, yes, I'm so keen to get back out there, sort of that 1 in 5. And there were people who were saying more neutral things like, oh, maybe 1 in 4, like I think about sex in a different way since lockdown. But actually a lot of the kind of most common sentiments were ones that are a little bit tinged with some anxiety. So I'm ready to start getting intimate, but I want to start slow. I feel anxious because it's been so long since I've been intimate. I'm afraid I won't know how to socialise or flirt. I've lost some sexual confidence. People would often mention body confidence, particularly if they've sort of felt that their body changed at some point during the pandemic. I'm worried that I'm no longer good in bed. My libido is pretty low, not comfortable communicating my boundaries, or I've forgotten how to meet people in person. I'm very nervous right now. This is more people than I've seen in a long time. But yeah, so it's a really, I think, a deeper picture than just the kind of like baby boom post-World War II, fantastic reopening. It's actually a sort of a sense of anticipation and anxiety as well.
Well, I think this duality is really normal and really expected. So I think the first thing I would do is really work to normalize that you can feel excited and apprehensive. You can really want to get out there, but also reflect on the time you had in lockdown and really love parts of it. And I think people are often thinking, I should just be happy. And there is a time of integrating everything really. And there's a time of getting used to, who you are now as a sexual person. These are 2 questions that I really love working with when I am supporting someone in, I guess, feeling more confident in their body. The first is I want to get a sense of maybe what is getting in the way between you and feeling most sexually confident. So for some people that may be, like the stats suggested, that you feel like you haven't had enough practice, or you're not feeling that in touch with your body, or you don't know how to do it, or you're wanting to find the right person, but you're also a little bit nervous about getting out there again. So it's a really individual thing, and I invite the individual to get a sense of what's getting in the way between you and feeling really confident. And then I think it's also useful to get a sense of how is not being vulnerable serving you? Because I think a lot of people say, you've got to be vulnerable, you've got to put yourself out there, you've got to be open. And I think that being vulnerable is actually a gift. And I think it's something that you can do when you feel safe or when you trust the person or people you're around. I don't think it's something you should do with everyone, especially if you're struggling with it. So when we work with that, I want to know maybe how is not being vulnerable serving you right now. And that could be that you're really exhausted after a long day at work and you want to go home and watch Netflix and just chill out. Or you don't actually particularly want to engage with people at the moment, but you feel a pressure to start dating. So again, very individual, but I want to look at maybe how being single is actually currently working for you. And if it is, we'll work with that. And if it isn't, maybe we'll work with what you can do to start dating or to feel more sexually confident. I guess this is a really powerful practice that I like to work with if people are noting, yeah, I actually do want to start dating, but there's something getting in the way between me and feeling okay with that. And that is creating a sense of safety and a sense of control. So perhaps you could also think about this, or if you're watching from home, pause and write a little list. And that might mean, what do I need to feel safe right now? Or what do I need to feel safe in that first sexual encounter or on that first date? And that could be going with a group of friends. It could be going somewhere you know. It could be taking your time and doing it really slowly. Whatever it is you need to feel safe. Then working with what do you need to feel like you have a sense of control. So this isn't to be confused with having control over other. It's more about the non-verbal or verbal cues that you need to feel or you need to have a sense of control. And that could be practicing those boundaries, and we've got a few coming up. It could be even just sort of taking a moment to get a sense of how your body responds when you feel like maybe you don't have control. That's the work that I do in the somatics or embodiment, where you turn to your body and you ask, oh, what is my body trying to tell me right now? So they might be more of the non-verbal cues. So when I was doing my training in working with vaginismus, the doctor who was leading the training really loved sex-positive affirmations. And I was a little bit skeptical. I really didn't know whether I would like teaching these or whether my clients would be open to this. However, I decided to give it a go, and I've actually noticed that these are radically useful. So basically, the top line science behind sex positive affirmations essentially looks at the process of neuroplasticity. So when we engage in new behaviors or ideas or concepts, ways of thinking, we start to rewire neural pathways. And a few examples of that could be perhaps if you have the self-talk of, I'm not sexy, I don't deserve pleasure, my body doesn't look good enough to have sex yet, I'm not good at giving head, whatever it could be. And then identifying that thought and thinking, actually, that perhaps isn't useful for me right now. What could I think or feel instead? And here are a few examples, and it could be, I am sexy. I am a sensual human. I am reclaiming and celebrating my body. I feel confident and sexually empowered right now. So I also know that can be a little bit awkward looking at that. And even some people feel really awkward saying it to themselves when no one's around and really no one knows what you're thinking. But I invite you just to get curious next time you have a thought and you're like, well, that's probably not so useful right now. And just see if one of these could be useful for you instead.
And I think one more thing as well that we love to kind of talk about is in sex therapy or in sex coaching, there's the idea of reframing sex away from our focus on orgasm. So in our culture, whether it's pop culture or pornography, a lot of the storylines that we hear are very focused on orgasm as the peak moment of a sexual experience and as the most important determinant of whether it was a good or bad sexual experience. So we can be very binary about did one or both partners or multiple partners have an orgasm, therefore it was good sex, or if we didn't, then it wasn't a good experience. And that can be counterproductive in a lot of ways when it comes to sexual functioning, whether it's actually struggling with orgasm like anorgasmia, or struggling with building and maintaining erections like with erectile dysfunction. So a lot of therapists will actually sort of deliberately teach people to broaden out and focus on the experience as a whole, or even to take orgasm off the table and sort of experience pleasure without a focus on orgasm. And that's actually an idea that I think we can really apply to dating as well. So with dating, so often we can sort of feel like it's a job interview in two directions, that it was a good date if both of you wanted to see the other person again, or even if it ended up in a serious relationship and it was not worth anyone's time otherwise. And I think it can be really nice to actually sort of treat dating a little bit more as a process rather than a destination, or to treat it as an experience from which you can take something good, regardless of whether it turns into a lifelong relationship and 20 children. So actually being able to sort of say, well, even if I take out of my mind the idea of a second or a fifth or a 10th date with this person, is there something that we can teach each other? Is there something I can enjoy here? Is there a good experience that I can have here? And seeing that more as something of a process of learning about others and potentially connecting really deeply with some of them can help people to, I think, feel both less at risk themselves, but also to help others feel less at risk and to enjoy that process wherever it leads as well.
Every time I speak about boundaries or I give specific cues or language, people are so grateful for them. And I think that this speaks to the fact that in the moment, sometimes we don't exactly know how to communicate. Sometimes we might struggle for the sentences or the words. We get worried that we might offend someone, and then maybe we don't ask for what we want. And I think, like anything, sexual communication is a skill, and it's something you have to practice. And in order to practice something, you really do need the tools to be able to draw on it. So I've written a few, ways to communicate boundaries with a few key, places or contexts that it may be useful. So I invite everyone to, either screenshot it, think about it, what would work for you, what wouldn't work for you. And I guess a few examples could be on a first date. So that might be, I'd love to get a drink with you. How do you feel about dating? That might be useful for the person 3 months ago. And then when you're on the date, things like, may I kiss you? Or how do you feel about physical touch right now? When I hear how people respond to those things, often they'll say, oh, it feels so awkward to ask if I can kiss someone. But then I also hear people say, God, that's so hot when someone asks you, because I guess it kind of eliminates the sort of, are we kissing? Are we not kissing? It becomes really clear. So, you know, people say it's hot. Safer sex practices, that could be, I know we're heading back to yours, and I just want to let you know that if we do have sex, that I only like to have sex when I'm using barrier methods like condoms or dental dams. Do you have any at home? Or another one, it could be, I know we've had sex in the past without barrier methods or protection, but I'd like to start using them now. In the moment, if something's changed and perhaps it felt like a yes at the start, and then you're thinking, actually, this isn't really what I want anymore. You could say something like, if you've noticed it in someone else, it could be, hey, I noticed you're looking a little distant. Let's pause for a sec and just check in. Or it could be you saying, I need a moment. Can we pause? I thought I'd be really into this, but I'm not. Let's stop. And then some other examples could be when the relationship changes. So this perhaps is for people who had a relationship within lockdown, and maybe that served a purpose in lockdown and maybe it doesn't serve that purpose anymore. It could be checking in. I know we discussed that we wanted something casual so that we could have a bubble buddy throughout lockdown, but as we're moving out, I just want to remind you I'm still wanting something casual. But how does that feel for you? Because I want to make sure you're feeling okay in this too. Or it could be on the other side of that, I know we went into this wanting to be casual, but I actually want something more. I want to check in with you. How does that feel for you? Where are you at? Sexting, I did a piece of content on this the other day, and I think it spoke to a lot of people because a lot of people have been using sexting over this time, but also perhaps a lot of people aren't knowing how to navigate this. So these one-liners aren't to be confused with one-liners you use on a dating app without saying hi at all or no context. This is once a relationship has kind of been established, and that could be, I want to send you a pic of what I'm not wearing, or how do you feel about sending nudes? Or if we were to start sending nudes to each other, what are we going to do to keep each other and the content safe? And finally, I love working with this process of how to receive a no, because sometimes it can really hurt when you're vulnerable and you ask for something, but then someone says no. However, there is never any case for you to persuade or coerce or convince someone to give you what you want. So instead, it could be, thanks for letting me know. Or it could be, I don't want to do anything that isn't really exciting for you. In some contexts, it might also be, thanks for letting me know, is there anything else you'd like to do instead? So there are a few examples, keep them in your toolkit, make them a screensaver, do what you wish with them.
The next section of our workshop speaks to that second theme that's come out of lockdown, which is desire and libido in lockdown. I mean, one of the really interesting things that we've seen is, as I said before, that kind of thriving versus surviving picture for couples, or even perhaps going through periods of thriving and surviving over the course of lockdown. So as a whole, sort of most, I'd say the population kind of skewed towards, either no change or somewhat lower or significantly lower libido. So about 43% of people were saying, yeah, my libido went down during this period. But there was also a group who said, actually, yeah, this has had significantly higher or somewhat higher libido as well. So it's a really interesting picture that doesn't necessarily sort of present a uniform one for everyone who came into the pandemic in a relationship. And then there's people who sort of, I think, reported to us about between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 couples would say to us, well, actually, this was a really good period. So I enjoyed time with my partner to be more intimate. I used time with my partner to work through intimacy issues in our relationship and build a connection. Or use lockdown to explore new things in their sex life, whether that's a toy or tennis dates, or anything in between, maybe all three combined. But we certainly saw that kind of picture of, some people finding that this was a really positive period for them, and some being like, actually, no, this froze us a little bit, or this was a tough time for us as well. And now I think we can explain a lot of that.
Yeah. When people come to see me, as I've said, it's usually because they have an issue or a concern or something that they want support with. And that's particularly true when it comes to questions around desire. And I think in most cases, people don't really understand what desire actually is. Often we think of desire, it's also called a drive, your sex drive. And really this isn't the most accurate way to speak to what desire is, because unlike eating and drinking water and breathing, if you don't have sex, you're not going to die. So I think when we think about sex as a drive, and it should be this thing that you should have, and if you don't have it, there's something wrong with you, it means that a lot of people self-diagnose as having low libido. But when they come to a session with me, I'm there to really speak to perhaps what is going on. And the first thing that I do is I share the 2 ways of experiencing desire. And in this, I'm going to be referring to Emily Nagoski's work. So for anyone who's wanting more information, that incredible Bible book, Come As You Are. I think, does everyone here have it? Lots of nods. Lots of nods. Great Christmas present if you don't already have it. So the first way of experiencing desire is spontaneous desire. That's what we see a lot in the movies or porn, or even we may be familiar with it at the start of a relationship. Essentially what that refers to is a spontaneous urge for sex that seemingly comes out of nowhere. So we see that a lot. It's healthy, it's sexy, it's wonderful, but it's just one way of experiencing desire. Then there's responsive desire. So that refers to how much stimulus your body needs in order to bring sex front of mind. So that could be dressing up and going on a date and thinking, oh, this is pretty romantic, we may have sex later. Or it could be investing in a toy or a new product or a lube and saying, I'm gonna get this, and on Friday I really want to explore this with you. It could be receiving a massage for 40 minutes or a really long slow kiss, but essentially what it's referring to is how much stimulus your body needs in order to respond. And I think when we're looking at this, often people will think, oh, because I'm responsive, then I'm not receiving enough stimulation that I want or need in order to bring it front of mind. They may just be thinking that they have low libido, but in fact, they're responsive. So we get really clear on perhaps how they're experiencing desire. And one way to do that is to look at your brakes and your accelerators. So this essentially refers to your brakes being your sexual inhibition system. So everything that says, absolutely not, sex is not a great idea right now. So that could be stress, low sexual self-confidence, performance anxiety, having a messy room, having a busy day at work, lots to do, all of those things. That will be quite different for everyone. So getting a sense of what that looks like for you. Then we have accelerators. So this is referring to your sexual excitation system. And that's when you scan your environment for everything that is sexually relevant or exciting. And that could be date nights, full body massages. It could be feeling confident, having time to connect, that long, slow kiss. So all those things that really allow for you to accelerate and to think, yeah, sex is a great idea right now. When I'm working with clients on this, I will pretty much draw a line down a piece of paper, write down all their brakes and write down all their accelerators. And more often than not, when they identify that maybe they've noticed changes in desire, they're not really desiring sex as much, they've got a few too many brakes going on. And it's pretty hard to go anywhere when you've got your foot on the brake. So what we look to do is take away some of those brakes, bring in more of those accelerators. And yes, that is sometimes really intentional. But ultimately, I think desire is all about creating the context for desire. It isn't something that can be fixed with a pill. It isn't something that I think you can self-diagnose as having low libido, but perhaps we can look at the context and what you need in order to think sex is a wonderful idea for me right now.
Absolutely. And I think something else that's worth acknowledging in this period is that a global pandemic is probably the most profound interruption of all of our contexts that we could have imagined. And so there is this sort of interruption that's been forced on a lot of us. And if you've experienced changes in the way your desire is behaving, there's a really good chance that you're experiencing a really dramatically different set of brakes and accelerators as well. And also to keep in mind that actually as we leave lockdown, that again, your context is changing and into something that you may not be sure about or that might be unfamiliar still. And so being kind to yourself during that period as well, and maybe taking a moment to think through an exercise like this and identify what might be acting as a brake or an accelerator depending on what level of desire you want to be experiencing or how you want to be experiencing it, can actually be a really useful exercise too. Getting freaky! Yay!
Is this lame? We don't know.
I don't know. I think it's coming back. Yeah, I think it's gone to full circle. Yeah, so in this final section, we want to talk to you about sexual exploration after lockdown. About half of the population brought new items into their sex lives, whether that's sex toys or something else. About 1 in 5 also experimented in other ways, whether that's exploring new parts of your body, exploring new practices with a partner, and also 30% of singles spent more time on masturbation and self-pleasure, which is awesome. Georgia, what are you seeing?
So as I've said, I have that really intimate insight with what people are thinking about, what they're wanting more information around. And there are a few key themes that have been emerging over the past few years, particularly actually in the pandemic. So group sex. I mean, the fact that perhaps there's more information out there around it, perhaps more access to it, but also the fact that we can't really get together in groups. I've noticed that people have been thinking around what that could look like to add sex into the mix of more than one. Non-monogamy. So this essentially refers to a relationship style that isn't just with one person. The umbrella of ethical non-monogamy really can speak to a range of different relationships. And in session, I'm working with people, supporting them in getting a sense of maybe what that would look like for them, whether they're currently in a relationship and wanting to open it up, or maybe if they're wanting to explore it as a single person. There's, I think, again, more information around it, more ways to connect with people who aren't monogamous. Kink. So this is anything beyond the straight and narrow. And whilst I'm not a huge fan of 50 Shades of Grey, I think that it, as a whole, culturally has really sparked a conversation as to what we can learn and re-script from that whole phenomenon. Sex education. So as you identified, even the show in itself, like the hype around that, people are really wanting and needing shame-free, sex-positive, inclusive sex ed that speaks to a range of human experiences beyond the cis-hetero experience, and they're wanting it to be age-appropriate, taught by professionals. We have really seen that need for sex education. I mean, that's obviously why we're in the space, but I'm noticing how people are really taking it on board to get educated, whether it's online or, attending workshops or even just following a trusted expert or professional online. Toys. I mean, gosh, and it's even funny to see how toys have changed over the years. I still remember going into the sex shop and just seeing all the dildos hanging. And I mean, I am fascinated by absolutely everything and I welcome everyone's yum. But yeah, they certainly have changed and there certainly is more out there for people beyond just the dildos that do look like penises, so that perhaps people who don't like to have sex with penises have access to some great pleasure items. Anal pleasure. This is something that every time I speak to it, people go wild for anal pleasure. They want to know information. Yes, sometimes get a little hate, but hey, you know, it's not a taboo if you're not copying some abuse.
It's a law of the internet that if you make content on anal sex, it will perform higher than anything else you make.
Yeah.
So Georgia recently did a TikTok on this that got 1 million views in 4 days. And it's, I think, I'd love your view on it. From my point of view, I think it's probably one of those areas where there's a lot of interest and curiosity about what anal sex looks like. I think because we sort of have some homophobic attitudes around who has anal sex and what that says about your sexuality, and perhaps because we have some sort of greater degrees of social taboo than some of the things that are further down the normalisation journey, a lot of people don't know where to go for high quality information that is sort of sex positive and can explain the anatomy and how to experience pleasure and all the different ways you can experience pleasure. So it is a really interesting space as well.
And to add to that, anal pleasure feels great. Like, I think that's why there's an interest in it, and feels great, I think, for a few reasons. It can be really down-regulating, so it can put you into your parasympathetic nervous system, support you in feeling relaxed. We work with either anal massage or breath work that can, feel really great, but also really pleasurable. There's a whole lot of erectile tissue. It's nerve-rich. But also for people with penises, they have a prostate, so they can experience orgasm in a whole new way, whereby their penis may not even be hard and they may not even ejaculate. So I think for all people, most of us, I think, have an anus. So I think it is one really great way to stimulate a nerve-rich part of the body. So yeah, I think that's another reason why it is so popular.
Absolutely. And I think an observation I'd almost add just overall on the whole theme of sexual exploration is, like, working in a space like this, we find ourselves making up for the gaps in formal sex education by helping our community. And in our formal sex education, we still don't get everything we need in terms of healthcare. Like, we get STIs and pregnancy, but we don't get the full types of contraception. We don't get queer sexuality. We don't get pain during sex or sexual dysfunction. We definitely don't get enough good education on respect and consent. And a topic like pleasure, or even exploring things that are not within everyone's sexual experiences, is definitely left off the curriculum. So this is one of the most profound spaces where we work to help people feel confident exploring it and get started. So Georgia, how would you start?
So I guess 3 things, if someone's wanting to explore something new, I want them to know that, as I've already spoken to, sexual communication is a skill and it's something you have to practice. So treat it like any new skill that you might be learning. Sometimes it's clunky, sometimes you don't get it right, but it is something that you can refine over time. Sexual shame is common as a result of the messages we receive about sex, whether that's social, cultural, political, religious. Many of our sort of foundational ideas around sex do come from a space of shame. So I think it is, very common or very normal for people at, some points in their life or throughout their whole life to experience a degree of sexual shame, but it's certainly something you can work with. And that's why people would come to see me. It's why they would engage in our course. It's why they'd go to workshops. And I think, as we can't really cover this huge topic here, I always like to refer to Brené Brown's quote that essentially speaks to shame derives from the unspeakable. So as we've said many times today, being able to speak openly about sex can do a lot to also work with perhaps shame that people may feel around certain aspects of their sexuality. And the final piece is, everyone has fantasies. Everyone doesn't fantasize about the same thing, but our minds do wander, and I think we really need to normalize this. But also, just because you have a fantasy, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to enact it. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to do it in real life. And we really should work with fantasies like any other sexual experience. So you may be wanting your partner to open up and share theirs with you, but again, you can't convince them to do anything that doesn't feel like a full body, excited, enthusiastic yes. Knowing that they can live in your head, they can be exciting in your head, they don't necessarily need to be fulfilled. But then I also work with people who are like, by the end of the year, I'm doing this thing. And I think it's great to have that sort of goal or that structure, or even just knowing that you want to explore this thing and see how it feels for you.
Absolutely. And I think that point, we often get that kind of question coming from a well-intentioned place of like, oh, I want my partner to share their fantasies with me and I want us to be able to connect over them or to give that to them. And I think it's always really helpful to just be a reminder to sort of that all intimacy comes from consent. And so someone sharing fantasies or not wanting to share fantasies with you isn't necessarily a negative thing as well. So how can we explore sexual things?
Sexual things.
That was much
Says
less,
the founder.
much less professional than I would normally say it.
What even are words? So yeah, if you're wanting to explore sexual things, I think there is a bit of a structure that I like to work with. And again, screenshot this, take a photo of this, and get really clear on this kind of process. So the first thing is, do your research, be as informed as you possibly can, whether that is, yes, doing a Google or seeing a professional or talking about it, asking a community or a group who currently engage with it, but be as informed as you possibly can. Create the context for this discussion. So if it's with someone else, can you create a context that feels really safe so that they can, be okay to talk about it, whether that is, making sure it's perhaps not just before sex or during sex or just after sex, but maybe at a specific time or during dinner or on a walk. So something that feels safe or somewhere that feels safe. Speak to the benefits. So a lot of people will say things like, I'm worried that my partner will be offended that they're not good enough. Speak to the benefits of what this could bring to your sexual relationship. Why is it that you're wanting to explore this? Which also goes through the why. So why do you think it will make it even better? What are you curious about? What's intriguing about this? Answer any questions that you or they may have so that everyone can perhaps work to get a sense of, is this right for me? As well as allowing for that time to go away and think about it. They don't need to give you an answer straight away. They may need to reflect on it. You also may need to reflect on it too. Then, I guess, if you're wanting to work with it, create a structure. So what does it actually look like to do it? Get really specific. Here is the time where you may set some of your boundaries. So a boundary is something you set in relation to other. An agreement is something you create together. They're two different things. And get a sense of what that could really look like if you are going to engage in this new thing. Practice and play sessions. So I love practice and play sessions because it allows for you to do the thing, get really clunky, over speak, maybe even be a little bossy with your communications so that you can be really, really practical in this new skill. Then a play session is taking all of those newfound skills into the exploration. Integration. So I think this is essential after any sexual experience. So taking a few moments, this can actually be just 30 seconds of integrating, whether that's a hug, whether it's lying still, whether it's a few deep breaths, taking that moment to integrate this new thing. Check in after and aftercare. Again, I think actually all of these things are pretty important, but that is asking things like, how was that for you? What would you do next time? Do you even want to do this again? It's that moment to connect to say, okay, we've done this thing. Will we do it again? And what will that look like? And this is actually something we developed for our course, which was essentially a checklist, because I guess you don't really know what you don't know when it comes to sex. So we listed a range of things alphabetically, and there are certainly a lot more sexual acts or experiences, but this was just as a way to feel into, is this a yes for me, a no for me, or I need more information? So perhaps you're at the start of your sexual exploration, you don't know what you want or what you want to explore. Perhaps this kind of checklist could be useful for you. So if you are curious to learn more, as we've said, we developed a course that has just that. We intended this to be the basics. This was informed by everything that I wish people had in working with clients in session, but as well as a huge amount of research that Lucy has done to make sure we were giving people what they wanted.
And also workshops like this. We tried really to design this as the ideal sex education that gave you the foundations of great sex, and that was responsive to what do we hear the most that people really want to hear about as well. But there are definitely other ways to seek support as well, whether that's seeking professional support if you're looking for a sex positive GP or a specialist, or if you're looking for a sex coach or a sex therapist who can support you in whatever you're interested in doing. There's also a lot of great hotlines and great resources out there. You can find brands like ours, you can find government websites. So I think whatever you need and whatever you think is going to be helpful to you, I'd encourage you to get on that journey and find those things as well. Finally, thank you so much, all of you, for coming in person. Thank you to the people who have come online as well. I think we can always sort of underestimate how profound a thing it can be to actually take the time to reflect and share about sex and sexuality in a society where that really hasn't historically been something a lot of us have had an opportunity to do. So I just want to applaud all of you for taking the time to do this and taking the time to invest in it as well. And I hope there's something really valuable in it for you as well. So thank you. Yay.